we're taking further steps to protect our most vulnerable.
The province is taking action after a disturbing report on long-term care homes. The Premier says the government will take over management at 5 facilities. It was a company that promised to bring in jobs for the local green energy sector, but now Unconquered Sun is closing up shop. A few raindrops out there this afternoon as we take a live look at the riverfront in one of those closed down playgrounds. The heat warning continues today. Colette Kennedy with the full forecast. I'm Chris Ensing, thanks for joining us. Should different parts of Ontario be treated differently when it comes to COVID-19 measures? That's what some experts are recommending, that a regional approach to reopening the economy should be based on the COVID-19 case count in different areas. Relax the lockdown in some regions while clamping down on the hotspots like here in Windsor, Essex. But how would that work with nearby communities that have far fewer cases? The CBC's Jason Vio joins us live with more reaction. Jason, how are people reacting to that idea?
Well, Chris, there is some concern that if things were relaxed in Chatham-Kent, as an example, that people in Windsor, Essex would travel down the 401 for different services that may not be available in their community that are in Chatham-Kent, and that may contribute to spread in the other communities as well. So let's take hairdressing as an example. Many people might travel an hour away down the 401 if that wasn't available closer to home, and many say the two regions are really connected. People commute back and forth, and one woman I spoke with today even called, she's from Chatham, they even called Windsor their downtown. There's more to do, different shopping options, so people go back and forth for those reasons as well. But one salon owner in Chatham does worry that if things are loosened in Chatham-Kent, again, as an example, not happening as of yet, that they will see more cases there because people from outside will come in. And one barbershop owner did echo those same concerns, and he also says, though, when he's allowed to reopen, that he'll likely have enough clients locally to keep him busy, and that anyone wanting a haircut from outside the region, he wouldn't be able to accommodate them anyway.
Oh yeah, it's very connected. I know a lot of people, a lot of my clients work in Windsor, those factories that they work in. So it does worry us, but I'm also very confident in the provincial health system and health professionals. I'm confident that they have a grip on what's going on.
Now, there's talk of this locally, Chris, because places in Quebec and Alberta have already taken on this approach. So if you go there, you'll notice different regions within those provinces have different restrictions based on the severity of how the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting those particular communities.
So how likely is it exactly that this approach comes with those restrictions, that it will actually happen?
Well, that will need to first come from the provincial level, and Premier Doug Ford has reiterated that he is only interested in a cross-Ontario approach in terms of reopening the economy. And we did speak with Chatham-Kent's medical officer of health today as well, and he says that he does have powers to implement stricter measures compared to what the province has already enacted, and he says he's done that. But what he doesn't have powers to do is loosen any sort of COVID-19 restrictions beyond what the province has set out already. And he says if that were to happen, kind of a scattered approach to restrictions in southwestern Ontario, he does have some concerns about that.
Certainly the idea has promise, but I share Dr. Williams' concern that if you are next door to a higher prevalence destination or higher prevalence area, that you could see migration from those trouble spots into places that are not trouble spots.
Now, we know that Windsor, Essex is a COVID-19 hotspot, and as of today, 920 cases, 63 deaths. By comparison, in Chatham-Kent, 1 death has been reported there, 144 cases, and only 7 of those are still active. So very different pictures just an hour apart. And Dr. Colby attributes that to stricter measures that he put in place from the very beginning. For example, he says long-term care workers in Chatham-Kent were not allowed and are still not allowed to work at 2 different facilities, and he implemented that before the province said it was mandatory. And in addition, he says healthcare workers returning from trips outside of Canada, well, they were required in Chatham-Kent to isolate for 14 days, and that was before the federal government implemented that rule as well. So he says that even if the province gives him the powers to relax some of those restrictions, he doesn't see himself taking that softer approach. Chris.
Thanks for this, Jason. Now, as families come to terms with the disturbing details of what the military saw in some long-term care homes, the province moves to take control of more facilities. 5 more long-term care homes are being taken over by the province. They are all in the Greater Toronto area, and combined, they've seen nearly 300 people die from COVID-19. The Premier says that they will now be under close observation while inspections of other facilities are stepped up. Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley has the latest.
I would remind the members that it's a long-standing tradition of the House not to point out the absence of any member.
The first question period since a devastating Canadian Forces report on long-term care homes, and the Premier is not there.
The Premier, who people deserve to have sitting in his place answering questions today.
Ford staff say he was absent so he could immediately address the issues raised by the Canadian Forces report. It reveals horrific tales of neglect in homes where the military was called in to help.
We're taking further steps to protect our most vulnerable.
One of those steps, a provincial takeover of 5 homes, all in the Greater Toronto area. Their combined death toll from COVID-19 is 275.
Seniors are suffering abuse and literally dying in long-term care homes where they're supposed to be protected.
The government is facing fierce criticism for failing to spot the long-term care horrors sooner. It has Ford promising new enhanced inspections of the most affected facilities.
I'll tell you, there won't be a piece of dust on the floor that they aren't going to be inspecting.
The government all but ceased proactive inspections of long-term care homes in 2019 and instead sent in inspectors only in response to complaints.
That is a red herring. The inspections have been done. We've had numerous people in there, including public health officials, doing risk assessments, infection prevention and control teams from the hospitals that we've integrated the homes with. So with all those inspections, how did the province miss what was happening?
We're going to continue doing rigorous inspections, a lot more rigorous, I guess, in the past, and we're going to continue doing that.
This all comes nearly 2 months after the Premier made this promise.
We're putting an iron ring of protection around our seniors.
Since then, nearly 1,600 people living in long-term care have died. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, this major report on long-term care has got people talking locally as well. Our medical officer of health says investigations into long-term care will help correct issues brought to light during the pandemic. Dr. Wajid Ahmed says the health unit has done the best it can to help various retirement and long-term care homes to get a handle on outbreaks.
It is a patch-up work that we have done to manage the outbreak and to provide the support that these facilities need. And again, it's no fault of any of the home or any of the employees or people working in that facility. I think it's a big systematic failure, and we'll have to have that review to find what will work best and how we can avoid and prevent these things from happening in the future.
Now, we've also told you about the spike in cases among those working on farms in Windsor, Essex. 36 people in the farming industry tested positive for the disease this week. The health unit has issued a class order to try and fight that spread. As of today, all farm employees, including contract workers, must work exclusively at one workplace. The health unit was asked today why this didn't happen sooner. Dr. Ahmed says a risk assessment needed to happen first. Failure to comply with the order can result in fines of up to $5,000. Meanwhile, a cannabis grower in the Leamington area is closing up shop. Tilray Inc. is closing up its subsidiary, Hyde Park Gardens, over the next 6 weeks. Hyde Park did confirm one case of COVID-19 earlier this month, but the company says the decision to close is unrelated. It's a move that officials say will save Tilray millions of dollars a year. 120 employees are currently employed at the Leamington site. A violin teacher who sexually assaulted his female students over a 20-year period in Chatham has been released on parole. Claude Tracy was sentenced in March to 8 months jail time for dozens of sexual assault charges. He was convicted of 51 sex-related charges and sentenced on 28 of them. Now, Tracy repeatedly asked his young students to take off their tops to measure shoulder rests. Here he is in some file footage trying to hide from a photographer at one of his court appearances in Chatham. Tracy would touch the students' bare breasts while measuring their shoulder rests. CBC News spoke with one of the women he assaulted. We can't identify her because of a publication ban. She says that now she's worried she may come across Tracy in the community and says that the time served breaks down to 3 days in jail for each person he sexually assaulted.
When you hear it and break the numbers down, the time served is insufficient. I mean, 3 days for a sexual assault charge. 3 days in prison for a sexual assault charge. We're not talking, I stole gum from the candy store. You know, this happened over months and years to some of us. 3 days.
It came to our region about a decade ago with the promise of creating local green energy jobs. But now Unconquered Sun is pulling the plug on its solar panel business in Tecumseh. Dale Molnar has more.
When Unconquered Sun Solar Technologies in Tecumseh first opened, it assembled and installed solar panels at businesses and homes. It once employed between 25 and 50 people.
We're going to be aiming a lot at the microfit contracts in Ontario.
The program where homeowners could create their own green energy and sell it back to the province. At one point, they produced a solar panel for a shuttle for the city of Windsor. But they stopped assembling solar panels about 8 years ago, and 5 years ago, the founder, Sean Moore, sold the company to Blue Water Power in Sarnia. The CEO tells CBC News when Doug Ford's government canceled the microfit program 2 years ago, the market for solar panels dropped off dramatically.
So we went from the heyday back when there was government programs providing 82 cents a kilowatt hour to today having a system which will offset your own cost of power, which let's say it's around 13 cents. So you can see a very big difference in the economics. And solar systems can be an emotional investment from the green energy perspective of it, or for most people, they're a financial investment. And as the numbers have changed over the years, the demand has dropped consistently.
McMichael Dennis says they had 10 employees in January, but the COVID-19 pandemic forced them to shut down and lay off people. Now only 3 employees work for the company, including the founder, Sean Moore. The building at the corner of Banwell and County Road 42 is up for sale for just over $2 million. McMichael Dennis says they will continue to operate for the next 2 months, finishing up installations and doing service work. Martin Amder is disappointed to hear of the closing. He bought $20,000 worth of solar panels from Unconquered Sun 4 years ago. He says Moore is coming out to do some service work on them this week. He was concerned how the closure would affect him.
So I was worried for my warranty, but the previous owner does guarantee me that he'll be looking after me and everyone else.
Warranties on panels sold recently will be covered by the manufacturer of the panels. This is just the latest green energy sector business in Windsor to close. CS Wind, which produced towers for wind turbines, closed last year. McMichael Dennis says closing down Unconquered Sun was a painful decision to make. Sean Moore would not comment on the closure. Dale Molnar, CBC News, Tecumseh.
A Quebec woman who was missing for nearly 2 years has been found safe here in Windsor. Jane Laura May is now 26 years old. She had last been seen at a movie theater near Montreal in October of 2018. May attended a film screening with her mother, but left before the movie ended and never returned. A Windsor police officer recognized May last Friday because of her tattoos. Police say she was in possession of false identification of excellent quality. They add that May's family is relieved to learn that she has been found. Former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick is not leaving prison early after all. The federal government says he's been turned down for home confinement during the pandemic. Kilpatrick is serving a 28-year sentence for corruption. The brief statement came 4 days after a Detroit area pastor and the Ebony Foundation announced Kilpatrick would be leaving a prison in Louisiana. The Bureau of Prisons is supposed to give priority to inmates who have served a much larger share of their sentence than Kilpatrick. He has only served 25% so far. China is expressing anger over the latest big developments in the case against Meng Wanzhou. She's the Huawei executive who was arrested in Vancouver 18 months ago on a U.S. extradition warrant. Today, a judge rejected arguments to have her case dismissed. Briar Stewart has the details.
Meng Wanzhou smiled on her way into court this morning, but she appeared nowhere near as confident as she did in that bold and somewhat bizarre photo shoot that took place on the steps here of the courthouse over the weekend. Some had wondered if it was a premature victory lap. If that's the case, it was very premature because the justice ruled against her today, saying the offense that she's charged with in the U.S. would also be considered a crime in Canada. Now, Meng is accused of lying to a bank about Huawei's business in Iran. And the justice had said that even though Canada doesn't have the same sanctions against Iran, the crux of the case is really about fraud, and Canada's laws around fraud go beyond international boundaries.
Frankly, it is a good decision in terms of delivering law and justice based on current judicial policy and the evidence.
Now, this decision means that Meng Wanzhou will remain under house arrest in Vancouver, and the extradition case against her will continue. Her lawyer will make other arguments that her rights were violated during her 2018 detention at the Vancouver airport and that she's being used as a political pawn in a trade spat between China and the U.S. There are many questions about what today's decision will mean for the relationship between China and Canada because it's really soured over this case. It was just yesterday that China's foreign ministry had warned that relations could deteriorate even further if Meng wasn't released. A newspaper affiliated with China's Communist Party says today's decision, quote, foreshadows the worst ever China-Canada ties. All this while Canadians Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig remained in prison in China in harsh conditions. They were arrested within days of Meng's arrest. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
Now back here in Windsor, the COVID-19 Assessment Center at Windsor Regional Hospital set another record yesterday. 237 people went to get a COVID-19 test. The spike comes after Premier Ford encouraged everyone to get tested, even without symptoms. Because of the increase in demand, the hospital is extending the hours for testing. Each weekday, the assessment center will now stay open until 9 p.m. On weekends, it will continue closing at 4 in the afternoon. And for those who might be missing their go-to national parks, they'll be happy to hear that Point Pelee National Park is opening up to weekend visitors as of June 13th. There are some limitations, though. Visitors will have access to trails and pathways, picnic areas, and beaches. Some public washrooms will be available as well. Other Parks Canada spaces will be opening up again next week, but access will vary across the country. Camping sites, those will remain closed until at least June 21st. Colette Kennedy joins us next with the full weather forecast. And joining us now for a live look at the weather is Colette Kennedy. Colette, a couple raindrops this afternoon, but it was kind of nice to feel that because it's just been scorching with the sun rays for that first little heat wave.
Yeah, it sure has, right? We've got this heat warning, third day in a row. And I will say that it looks like, Chris, as we get into the next couple of days, we're going to see these gentle changes. We're probably not going to be meeting the criteria with Environment Canada for the heat warning. So likely we'll see this dropped. But for now, it's still something we have to be very careful with because it can, in fact, be harmful if you don't take it easy. So we still need to do that. The current temperature is 28. You can see Chatham-Kent at 26. But do you know the hot spot in Ontario today at nearly 35 degrees was Ottawa. So the nation's capital again today. Yesterday was a hot spot in all of Canada. Today, Ontario. Well, never mind. It feels like 35 in Windsor when we go ahead and take a look at that humidex value. So still that sticky air mass. As you mentioned, a few of those little sprinkles that pass by. There's a little bit of activity to the south of us. Again, this will probably fall apart more as it pushes northward, but a few stray sprinkles may come through this evening as well, just kind of the leftover, the remnants of that. Otherwise, we're left with some of this cloud cover, and we'll get some breaks as we go through the overnight hours, but then as we get into tomorrow, the clouds are going to be thickening back up again, and we do have some precipitation that's going to pass through a little more towards the east. It may just kind of tag you towards Chatham-Kent, but probably more towards London and back to the west of us. We're kind of caught in between, but it's almost a good scenario where we may stay drier through the day. I have put some scattered showers and thunderstorms in the forecast because the risk is really there in the area, so you need to know about that. But into Friday, that's when the cold front is going to move quickly, but the actual cold front, so the leading edge of a cooler, drier air mass is going to move through. So thunderstorms quite likely into Friday as well along that front. And then we dry out into the weekend. I don't just mean the rain leaves, I mean the dew points come down as well. So it becomes much more comfortable. There you are, an average low, and these are our lows, so still running in those upper teens. Tomorrow, still in those upper 20s with some widely scattered showers and thunderstorms. Friday, thunderstorms along the front as it passes through, and then look how it brings the temperatures down, especially for Sunday for that second half of the weekend, Chris.
Something a little manageable. Thanks, Colette.
You're welcome.
Coming up next, we are going to take a look at some data that came off the back of turtles. That's next. Researchers have recovered a huge trove of data from 2 endangered leatherback turtles tagged off Nova Scotia last summer. The turtles were carrying instruments that recorded their movements during a 12,000 kilometer migration to the Caribbean. Paul Withers reports.
Keep this clear.
Ruby and Isabel were captured 2 days apart south of Halifax and fitted with tracking devices to follow them in the open ocean.
Off she goes. This is the transmitting antenna, if you will.
Lead scientist Mike James says the tiny sensors are capable of storing a complete track of their movements, but to get the data back, they had to get the tag back, and it rarely happens. Only 4 archival tags have been recovered in 20 years, the last one 7 years ago.
Can we actually access the beaches, not knowing initially where these animals were specifically going to go? And then would the turtles present themselves on the beaches when people were around?
He was stranded in Halifax by the pandemic, so when it became clear both turtles were headed to Trinidad, he called on Kyle Mitchell.
It was certainly very exciting.
The researcher was actually in Nova Scotia on exchange last summer and on board to help tag one of the turtles. 10 months later, he helped intercept Isabel. After many nights of waiting, both tags were recovered this month on separate beaches and new transmitters attached.
I was very fortunate to be a part of both sides.
How do you feel about this experience?
Definitely overwhelming. Overwhelming and tiring, but definitely worth it.
Worth it because of this, a complete record of their 12,000 kilometer migration, the most data ever collected in one time in 2 decades of tagging. It includes information on their movements in Trinidad, the nesting destination for most of the declining Northwest Atlantic population that are in Canadian waters, information that could help protect the species.
We know that there are a lot of threats to the turtles in those areas, and there are a lot of interactions with local artisanal fisheries, and there are a lot of places where there happens to be a lot of human impact on the turtles.
Ruby and Isabel are expected back in Canadian waters in August, but will Canadian scientists be out there as well? With the Department of Fisheries and Oceans closed down by the COVID pandemic, it's not clear whether leatherback tagging will take place this summer off Nova Scotia. The program usually starts in July. No decision has been made. Paul Withers, CBC News, Halifax.
6:29 p.m. and that's it for CBC Windsor News. Don't forget, for news anytime, you can go to our website, cbc.ca/Windsor. We're on social media too. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Power and Politics is up next. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.